Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third day of the second annual Global Climate Action Symposium. My name is Kim Cobb, professor in the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at Georgia Tech and the director of Georgia Tech's Global Change Program. Together with our partners, Georgia Tech Center for Serve, Learn, Sustain and the Atlanta Global Studies Center, together with Atlanta-based consulates of Germany, France, Netherlands, Switzerland, Belgium, and the UK, we are thrilled to welcome you to this event today. Today's event will focus on COVID-19 and green recovery, and I can't wait to hear from all of our experts and get into the discussion with you, our audience. So today it is my pleasure to introduce one of my esteemed colleagues, Şebnem Özkan from the Atlanta Global Studies Center. She's the Associate Director of that center, and I'm very honored to sit with her on our Institutional Sustainability Task Force, where we work together with colleagues from across campus to think about envisioning Georgia Tech's future as a leader in sustainability and to make sure that we're building a strong community on and off campus focused around sustainability. She is an amazing asset and has done so much to make today's event a success, in particular, working very hard to organize the student photography contest that we'll be featuring at the end of the day. Şebnem, thank you so much for providing some opening comments today.
Thank you so much, Kim, for the kind introduction and for your leadership in organizing this excellent event, important symposium. And thanks for being such a great partner in our sustainability efforts at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, and beyond. It's a true privilege and pleasure working with you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the last day of this exciting symposium. My name is Şebnem Özkan. Again, I'm the Associate Director of the Atlanta Global Studies Center. Our center is a partnership between Georgia Tech and Georgia State University, and we work closely with other higher education institutions and community partners in our region. And our aim is really to advance education for sustainable development and UN SDGs. And we offer various programming and projects, including our annual symposium, which is always dedicated to UN SDGs in research, teaching, and community engagement. Our center strives to bring global and interdisciplinary perspectives into the sustainability field, expand the diversity and inclusivity of the sustainability conversation, and we specifically try to highlight voices from around the world, from arts, humanities, and social sciences. Today's theme of COVID-19 and green recovery underlines how the pandemic has made the old opposition between local and global obsolete. It also highlights the importance of incorporating equity and climate action into economic and societal COVID-19 recovery plans around the world. At our center, we think that COVID-19 has made think locally, act locally, think globally, act locally more than a checkbox exercise, and it really calls all of us to action, including those of us in the academia. Arguing for a more ambitious global agenda and connectivity might sound counterintuitive given the current situation, a time when social distancing is prescribed as the key to containing the virus. But we argue that bolstering academia's commitment to relating to the world beyond its diminishing borders, both locally and globally, cannot be more urgent. Now is the time for universities to renew their commitments to preparing global citizens and serving the local and global public good. A focus on sustainable development, cultural, economic, environmental, and equitable should undergird that commitment, and our center is dedicated to advancing this agenda. With that, I would like to welcome you again and thank you for joining us, and we look forward to being with you today for a series of inspiring and energizing conversations. Don't forget to check us out at 11:30 when we are going to announce the winners of the photo contest. And we're also going to share some interesting results from our Youth Climate Action survey. So please make sure you tune in and you're with us at 11:30. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you for those opening words. Good morning. My name is Selena Perrin. I lead the communications team with the Georgia Tech Global Change Program. I'm thrilled to welcome everyone to the final day of our first ever virtual Global Climate Action Symposium. Today's events explore emerging frameworks that advance climate action on the pathway to social and economic recovery from COVID-19, including emerging plans currently under development in Europe. At this virtual symposium, we also have the distinct pleasure of welcoming a global audience to join in this discussion. And I'd love to see where everyone in the audience is connecting from. So please share the country or state where you're joining us from in the chat. This morning, we'll listen to a panel discussion, then enjoy a keynote fireside chat between Dr. Dagmara Koska and Dr. Vicki Arroyo, before showcasing a series of 4 short student talks. Join us at 11:30 to learn the winners of that Student Art and Photography contest. And then finally, Dr. Kim Cobb, the Director of Global Change Program, will conclude the symposium with remarks at 11:45 a.m. We invite you to follow along in the online agenda, which is hosted on the Georgia Tech Global Change Program's website, globalchange.godtech.edu/GCAS. This link has also been posted in the event chat. We'll begin with a panel discussion moderated by Marcel Beukeboom. Marcel Beukeboom is a dedicated representative of the Netherlands at international gatherings dealing with climate change. At home, he is the figurehead of national climate policy. He connects the global to the local, policy to practice, problem to solution. In short, he connects the dots. Marcel is an experienced all-around diplomat. Recurring themes in his work are sustainability, governance, and multi-stakeholder partnerships, with a special emphasis on youth. Thank you so much for joining us today, Marcel.
Thank you, Selena, and thank you for this kind introduction. And I'm very happy to be on this panel. And I think you very well introduced the discussion we are going to have today, that with the connection between the global and the local. It's my job to represent my country internationally, but as you said, I'm very much interested in what's going on locally, as that is where it ultimately has to happen. International agreements that you know, and I think that the one most famous in the field of climate change is the Paris Agreement. But the Paris Agreement is a very nice piece of paper, but ultimately we have to go down into provinces, cities, rural areas to actually make it to life. So that is what we are going to talk about today, with people that are also working on the intersection between the global and the local, and that in their own way try to make connections between their field of expertise, their work, and climate change and other fields of our societies. I have to start with, unfortunately, share the regrets of Shelby Buzo. Shelby is the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Atlanta, but she just called in telling us that she is ill, and well, what an illustration that could be in these times of COVID-19, that health is really chasing us even into this panel. So we are having a discussion now with 2 remaining panelists, Laura Taylor of the School of Economics at Georgia Tech, so I guess well known to many of you calling into this panel. And interesting to her work and her research is, I think, that intersection between different fields. If you read her biography, you see that it's researching the interface between economies and social sciences, that there is an intersection between, for example, water conservation policies and the effect on households, waste and communities, offshore wind energy, coastal tourism. So that kind of intersection, I think, is very valuable to the discussion that we are going to have. And the same goes to Mirjana Spoljaric. She is the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, and Assistant Administrator of the UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme. And with her work focusing mainly on Europe and the CIS, she is also experienced in that local and hands-on implementation of programs. And that, I think, is also very good to insert into this discussion that we are going to have in Atlanta, in Georgia, but because we are doing this online, hopefully with the attributions of many others. So that is the panel that we have, but of course the real panel is not only the two speakers and myself, but also the audience. And as was said in the introduction already, use the chat function to pose your questions. We will definitely have time at the end to respond to those. But if there's something very pressing that is useful for the discussion as we will go on, I will get a signal that I can use it as we go. Having said that, getting back to the subject of today, COVID-19 and the green recovery. Note that word, green. That is an interesting one. As a government representative, I do experience how difficult it is to actually get some sort of a color to the recovery packages that we are designing. And I'm sure that's no different across the globe. So that is something that we try to explore. But from my perspective, and I think also from the perspective of the others here, it is remarkable how quick the global community was in responding to COVID-19. Working on climate change and a global response to climate change, we are pushing very hard for years and years to actually get to some sort of a global response, and we only slowly make some progress. And there was this global pandemic, and all of a sudden governments across the globe responded in a more or less comparable way. And that is interesting, and that is hopefully teaching us some lessons of how we can actually apply that similar approach to that's what I would say a bigger crisis that is looming or that is upon us already, climate change. So with that, having said that, and seeing whether there are any interactions and intersections between health, socio-economic issues and climate change, it is my first question, and I will start with Mirjana at the global level, looking at this from your perspective and working in different countries, coming from a multilateral organization that is designing policies to do that. Do you have any experience in how the debate and the actual response to COVID-19 could actually help you in also greening your own responses to your work?
Thank you, Marcel, and good morning, colleagues. I am very excited to be part of this conversation with you and Laura this morning, and I'm also very much looking forward to hearing Laura's inputs on this and to learning from her experience. Just a few words before I start. UNDP is the largest UN development agency, one that works in about 170 countries across the globe with 17,000 staff on the ground. We cover the whole spectrum of the Sustainable Development Goals, including climate change, and we have the technical lead now for the UN family on the socioeconomic response to the COVID pandemic, which we initiated first by a first round of impact assessments, and then based on those work now with national governments in developing national response plans in most of the countries that we work in, depending on the context and their needs. Now, what we see from our first assessments is that we have a world that is being hit hard by two unprecedented crises at the same time. They are directly intertwined and they have many similarities. Both the global pandemic and the climate change crisis that you are facing today are non-linear risk multipliers with a lot of interdependent socioeconomic impacts that grow disproportionately amongst different social groups. But what we can say is that the socioeconomic impact of both hits those who are already poorest the hardest, and those who are already most vulnerable suffer the most. So the measures that are being taken to counter COVID again have the biggest socioeconomic impact on those who are hardest hit by the pandemic. So we are constantly working in this complex vicious circle, and need to find smart solutions. And for this, it is extremely important that we join forces with everybody, including the academia and the private sector, and have the possibility and the platforms to design the smart solutions that we need going forward. Now, what we also see is that apart from the poorest being hardest hit, is a rise in inequalities that is aggravating both through the pandemic and the climate change, again requiring very multidimensional and integrated responses. Now, of course, both have no borders and both require global responses, but these responses have to be translated down to the municipal level. And if that doesn't happen, there's no impact. And this is where we work. We are present in 80% of the municipalities across the 18 countries in Europe and the CIS where we are. So we constantly have to make sure that we establish this coherence, but we also connect the global knowledge with the local necessities and act tailor-made. Now, just a few things before I hand over to you back, Marcel. Just a few facts about the two crises and how they evolve. COVID-19 impacts the global economy and governance systems more than any crisis before, probably, at least since we have started measuring human development. We also are facing the hottest year on record in 2019. We don't have the measurements for 2020 yet. And these high levels of carbon dioxide emissions stem from fossil fuels and carbon intensive practices. Now, what we need to do if we want to benefit from this unique opportunity to build back better and to think global and act local, is we need to combine the Paris Agreement, nationally determined contributions, which have to be enhanced now in view of the COP26, which will take place in November next year, with the national response plans that are in parallel being developed to counter the COVID crisis, because we see that the economic impact and the health impact of both crises is aggravating the underlying challenges that existed before and that are being accelerated through both crises at the same time. So to align and integrate the NDC measures and strategies with COVID-19 recovery will enable us to secure green and resilient economies going forward, because according to global studies, technology transformation will be spurred if we do that, job growth will be spurred if we do that, and we can also effectively address social inequalities. So there is a possibility to build back better, but it will require a few dimensions that I can address later in the conversation, but I would like to hand back to you first. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this introduction, Mirjana. And you touch upon so many issues that it's hard to focus on one. I would like to ask you one follow-up question on what you said about inequalities and the multiplier effect of both the climate crisis and this pandemic, and the effects on the poorer people in societies. We do hear globally from leaders the call for a green recovery. It is your boss, Antonio Guterres, who keeps on mentioning this. It is the Kristalina Georgieva at the IMF. It is the leader of the European Union, and we hear it all across the globe. But then sometimes you also hear some criticism and people saying the money that we will now invest in green recovery cannot go to health and a health response and vice versa. Do you have examples of where you have found a so-called win-win, where actually your investments would benefit both health and the environment? And to put an extra layer on that, what you introduced as well as the poorer people as well. So is there even a golden bullet that could strike all those birds in one go?
Thanks, Marcel. I don't think that there is a silver bullet or a golden bullet, as you call it. But there is a possibility to learn and to do things smarter going forward. And I think it starts by addressing the challenges of tomorrow and not the challenges of yesterday. It is about building the markets and the systems of tomorrow and not of today, if we want to cope with the accelerated pace of change that we are facing nowadays. What we need to do, and this is why I'm very interested in hearing Laura as well, we have to learn how to integrate the different fields. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, you cannot take one out and pursue it individually. You have to constantly keep the whole spectrum in front of you. You cannot have gender equality without reducing inequalities in general. You cannot have inclusive economic growth without integrating women into the labor market at all levels and in all sectors. We need technological transformation. Without that, it will not happen. But at the same time, we have to put humanity into these advancements. We will not see climate change reduction if we don't have gender empowerment, because the climate impact very often comes from social inclusion and social inequalities. Many farmers burn wood woods and forest because there are not adequate systems in place to allow them to produce sustainably. So it's all interlinked. Now, if we want to address COVID and climate change at the same time effectively, we have to start with political advocacy. There has to be a recognition that there is a possibility to build back better if we join forces and if we accept this integration. So the response doesn't pertain to the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Health. The COVID crisis was in many countries, for instance in Kyrgyzstan, an economic crisis before it became a health crisis, because the economic impact of the global response to COVID hit the country before the virus even got to the people. So you can't call it a health crisis. In many places, including in Kyrgyzstan today, you have to call it a political crisis, because they have in the meantime even overthrown or are in the process potentially to overthrow the government. So you can distinguish that from what is happening in the country and what impact COVID caused. Now, if I say political will, it means don't put it into the Ministry of Environment, don't put it into the Ministry of Health. Start with the national budget, start with the National Account Plan and the reform of the Finance Ministry, because this is where the decisions are taken and where the impact can happen. And then, of course, you have to learn how to pursue a whole of government approach and how the different systems in the country down to the local level have to talk to each other. And their digital transformation can play a huge role. Now, the second is public finance. Green budgeting, for example, is a useful tool for informing tax and spending decisions, and economic instruments such as carbon pricing can provide the revenues for recovery. But we also have to build better policies that will help private money be channeled into the right areas of the economy to accelerate green job growth and investments in green technologies. We need strong institutions, and this is goal 16 of the SDGs, because these institutions have to have the capacity to develop these policies. They have to be able to assess where the accelerators are in the national and local context for sustainable development. And last but not least, what I kept saying from the outset is that we have to keep the social dimension in mind. Recovering better means ensuring that there's just transition, that there's equality and a sustained focus on those who will otherwise be left behind, so the poorest groups of each society. Thank you.
Thank you for this very elaborate and learned explanation of the complexity of the issues, plural. It almost looks like a Jackson Pollock painting, but I'm actually able to see the connection. So it's I think very good that you do have all those development goals in mind when you design your programs and your projects. But it still, as you also say, needs a lot of space to keep on learning, and that is my little segue to Laura, who is looking at the systems and the connections. And my question to Mirjana was there a reason to rethink your work and your approach because of COVID-19? My same question to you, looking at it from a more conceptual or academic point of view, what have you learned, and how should we go about in getting to a better future, greener recovery from all this?
Well, thank you, and thank you for the introduction and the comments. What have I learned from COVID? I was asked that question yesterday, and maybe I'll interject with just a little bit of a joke. I learned in teaching online for the first time that I have a Southern accent, and I didn't realize that until I watched myself teach, and I was like, oh my goodness, I have picked up quite the Southern accent since being in the South, and I'm proud of it. So it's a pleasure to be here. I think if I could start my comments by weaving back to your win-win or multiple benefits question about a green recovery or climate solutions and health. And so I think one of the most important things that we think about in the US are that traction, both locally and at the federal level, is that climate work is local health work. Not always, but in many, many very important instances, climate work is a local health issue. It is impacting your children, your neighbors' children, and you and your neighbors. And so, when we decarbonize the grid, when we electrify transportation with carbon-free energy, these are probably two of the most powerful tools we have to make a big change more quickly. The technologies are there. R&D is still needed. We need lots of research and investment, and especially in next grid technologies. But again, thinking about this is a local issue. This is building a new grid in sub-Saharan Africa. This is technology skipping in countries that aren't already built out with the old technology. So thinking back to how sub-Saharan Africa, technology skipped with landlines for phones. They went straight to cell phones, right? In areas where, as the cell phone revolution was taking off, in areas where there were not already integrated landlines, they don't exist, never did. That kind of technology skipping is a real opportunity, but again, it must be a solution that is tailored to your local communities. So I'll do just a quick example, and it's maybe it's a shameless plug for a project we have at Georgia Tech in conjunction with UGA, University of Georgia, Emory University, Georgia State University, called Georgia Drawdown. And in this project, which is about to launch in a couple weeks, and will continue through the fall, we're looking at the most aggressive and biggest solutions for drawing down carbon in Georgia. And when we look at some of the key big solutions, which are decarbonizing the grid and increasing penetration of solar, and electrifying transportation, locally, local health benefits from reduced PM 2.5, from reduced mercury and NOx and SOx. Those benefits are in the many billions of dollars per year in Georgia alone from these solutions, right? When we look back at the Clean Power Plan under the Obama administration that was making its way through, the local health benefits from decarbonization of the electric grid in the U.S. were in the trillions of dollars annually. Those health benefits are people benefits, and we lose that context sometimes in the public discourse. So absolutely, I believe that climate work is a local health issue. Our 450, I'm sorry that Shelby couldn't be with us for the city of Atlanta. There are our climate action mayors, which is a group of 450 mayors in the United States who are taking action on climate. And they very much view this as a local issue, a local health issue. And in absence of a federally coordinated plan, they're making great strides forward in exactly the kinds of things that we are looking at. They know their communities. They know where the inequities lie. They know where the most vulnerable populations are and can reach out directly to ensure access to solutions, right? To work toward inclusive growth. And importantly, with COVID, I think has highlighted our opportunities in the remote space, and will that change the amount of telecommuting in the future? So video conferencing rather than flying for a meeting with 5 people for one day. But that requires broadband access in rural areas, which is still lacking in the United States. And those are the kinds of inclusive growth and green recovery isn't always directly, obviously, a green investment. So for instance, it may not be an investment in grid infrastructure, but an investment in people that allow them to have access to the technologies, the jobs, and the tools that are climate friendly. So, to your question of, has COVID changed the way I think about, or academics might and economists might think about how you do a green recovery? I don't think so. I mean, the tools that we've learned and the things that we know that we should do, we know what those are. We know that we should be pricing carbon. We know that we should stop subsidizing fossil fuels. We know that inclusive growth, we know what that means. We know how to think about those things. I think it comes back to political will, and that is something that, at least in the U.S., where we see that action, and again, is at a local, state and local level rather than federal level. So the U.S. has not stopped moving forward. It is that in the global in the global audience, it certainly appears so, and we have certainly had some setbacks, but there are 350 million people in this country who are working hard to make change and make solutions, and I think that it's exciting to think about the opportunities when you think about them as local opportunities. So I'll stop with that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it immediately leads to a follow-up question to you, prodding a little bit, and hopefully also making the connection back to what Mirjana said earlier. If I summarize especially what you said in the beginning, very quickly, not doing justice to everything you said, but the global climate crisis is a health crisis. I'm just thinking back of last year, and I'm active in global and multilateral climate negotiations for several years now. And the United Nations Secretary General last year, at his Climate Action Summit in New York in September, he gave the main podium to the World Health Organization. basically trying to bring those two silos, if you could call it like that, together, and using some of the figures coming from the health domain, the 6 million people dying each year of poor air quality and things like that, hoping that making it much more concrete than it was up to that moment, that people might get into action. So remember, this was all pre-COVID, so we didn't know we could react to a health crisis so quickly. So he thought, and I think that the thoughts were good, that connecting the two would actually accelerate both fields. Mm-hmm. It didn't really happen, but my question to you is, having listened to Mirjana, that if you would reduce it to a health crisis, wouldn't you miss out some of the connections that Mirjana just laid out to all the other 17 SDGs? So I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you see what I want to ask you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I guess there's taking a U.S.-centric perspective. So when I think about climate action in the U.S. and how one thinks about the health-climate intersection. In the U.S., that intersection broadly is at the local health level, meaning local air pollutants that are co-produced with carbon. So your NOx, your SO2, your PM 2.5. And so actions that reduce that carbon that also reduce those local air pollutants is where those health benefits arise. Deaths from heat exposure, from violent storm events and so forth that are linked to climate change are a relatively small part of the overall impacts in terms of health in the U.S. Now, this is not true globally, right? This is a very specific situation for us. So linking it to health in the U.S. is, I guess it does it link to all the other SDGs and equity and inclusion. I think it's in the implementation, because it is a women's issue, it's a children's issue, it's an underserved community issue. It's a economic development issue for communities, right, at the very local level who are impacted negatively, an environmental justice issue, and implementing solutions requires addressing those issues at the same time, or you will have failed in some dimension. I do think that I don't think it stops health from being the first a good connection that is one that we can all focus on and get traction and support for, but it misses many pieces, obviously. And it's also very region specific. The issues around health in the U.S. are going to be very different than in Northern Europe and in Sub-Saharan Africa, so forth. So you have to tailor that discussion and those considerations to each specific area and country and region within a country. I guess what I keep coming back to is that thinking locally is really critical. It's absolutely critical. The macro policies that guide, they're the guideposts that can move the way we do things, for sure. And I absolutely agree. It starts with the national accounts. It starts with where the money is flowing, right? Where is the support? Is it going to be back into the fossil fuels? For air transit, that is one of these big thorny issues. How do you decarbonize the airline industry is going to be very tricky. I mean, we will grow out of this, right? We will eventually have airline travel that will grow beyond what it used to be, even if we telecommute less. When you have more people on the planet and you have economic growth, we will eventually grow out of this recession and this slump. So we remain, I think, back in our original challenges of that if people are still flying and flying more, how do we decarbonize that? How do we decarbonize our transportation? How do we decarbonize our energy systems? It's still the absolute critical issue, because we will grow out of it.
Yeah, thank you. And that brings me back to the theme of this panel as well. And it's from the global to the local. I hear you say, think locally, but and I think part of your response is also that it often is useful to depoliticize the issue, and health could actually do that because it touches directly on people's lives. That is my segue back to Mirjana. As you, I think, act locally all across the globe, so that is, I think, a very important experience. Are there any experiences that you have, maybe from other parts of the world, that could be useful to some of what Laura indicated is happening in the United States? And again, it's a pity that Shelby is not here, but perhaps you could say something from your perspective that could play a role there. Maybe also integrating in your answer a bit more on the inequalities that you have touched upon earlier.
Thank you, Marcel. If you look at global challenges that are the key drivers of negative and of potentially positive change, but currently of the negative trends. You have climate change and you have inequality, and both are not easy to tackle. But I agree with Laura. In many cases, we know what needs to be done. It's just that how do we get between the knowing and the doing, from the knowing to the doing? Now, if you look at the numbers, it's so obvious. You know, we throw away 1/3 of all food produced, whilst 1 in 10 people in the whole world are hungry and severely hungry. We spend 10 times more on fossil fuel subsidies than we spend on renewable energy. Why is that? If we know that investments in renewable energies are, creating jobs and creating that better health in the future. Now, what is important to repeat, and what has been said before, is that we need to work at the local level, and we need to have the translation down to the local level, because that's where we know where the needs are and the inequalities. We need that knowledge. And the work with the mayors is extremely important. And I think it's recognized also in the UN system, and in many regions we are working with the mayors. Now, at all levels, what you have today is governments that are, also having good intentions. I wouldn't perceive national governments as the ones being an obstacle to green recovery. And we have good examples. In Thailand, the government is undertaking now an economic analysis of climate action to elaborate fiscal incentives for climate investments. We work in Ukraine in area-based development. We are trying to link digital transformation with urban infrastructure that is more resilient and low carbon. We are working in Rwanda to help the government green its recovery and develop checklists to support SMEs to channel them into greener areas of activities. What you need to do is to help the institutions identify the accelerators for positive change, and they can differ. But what I also hear from governments when I engage with them is that they want to be able to tap into global experience. So Laura, if you say you know how it needs to be done, that experience needs to be shared. And so what UNDP is doing is we are setting up a global network of accelerator labs. But in 90 countries by now, we have these labs integrated in our national country office. And these labs are meant to go beyond the boundaries of the sectors and teams, and to bring in actors at the national and local levels to design specific solutions for specific problems, like in Ukraine, the burning of crop. So what is the key driver of the farmers still burning the fields, and how can we counter that? Now, once this solution is established at the national level, it feeds into a global network of policy experts and practitioners that we are building, and we call it the Global Policy Network, so that anybody in Mexico can learn from that experience in Ukraine or in Moldova, where we have a tech community that is very advanced and also willing to share that experience. And there is also, you know, a collective pride then if you design something, if you see this being replicated in other countries. And again, these mechanisms to connect require digital tools. We have them, and the digital push we have experienced with COVID, I think, can be used in that sense to connect these practitioners and to let them learn, but also to help build that political momentum that is required. And this is the first dimension I started with. If there's no political will, there's no action, and the young nowadays play a crucial role. I mean, we saw the climate change protests, and you know, they can be the drivers nowadays for real change at the policy level. Thank you.
Thank you. And without perhaps knowing it, Mirjana, you have entered into that's part of the panel where I would like to involve the audience, and you have been answering one of the first questions that was posed already, one from Andrew Stoughton from the UK, who is also joining in, on how can we actually share experiences globally, and I think you answered that question already. And his follow-up question is on the involvement of other stakeholders. You briefly mentioned youth. He is specifically asking for the private sector as well. In my experience, working with the private sector, also in the US context, helps you to make concrete progress. That's one thing. But also, again, to depoliticize the issue, as you are talking about economic progress, social inclusion, green products, and ultimately, in this day and age, in this year, a green recovery. So that is something that could be useful. I'm actually a question to the two of you. Maybe you could say something about your view on that, the involvement of other stakeholders than governmental or public actors, and more specifically, and you mentioned it briefly already, the involvement of young people beyond them being protesters. Maybe I start with you, Laura.
Well, I will say just to always remember that, you know, climate, it is an environment. It doesn't matter, you know, we can speak of the water quality and anything in the environment. It is a production and consumption problem. It's quite simple. It is not a 200 country, it's an 8 billion people problem. It is individuals making everyday decisions, individual business leaders organizing their businesses, organizing their products, delivering them to customers. Business sector is absolutely critical in this, and indeed business can be catalyzed to be the leaders, right? The leaders in making change, because it is the business, is the production side where you can make, you know, of course we can reduce consumption, reduce the demand side, but really it's the production side has much change to do. And so catalyzing, supporting, and rewarding the business sector is absolutely critical, right? It's absolutely critical, and at least in the US, and that's where the political will then follows as well. In terms of engaging the youth, I will say that it is my privilege to be to teach and interact with students every day at Georgia Tech, and the reason is, every time I have an opportunity to have a conversation with our students, I realize that tomorrow will be different than today, and that these kids are going to change the world, and I have hope for the future. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to be immersed in the thinking and the energy and the drive and the determination of the next generation of leaders. And so to engage them in more than just protests, right? Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure I have an answer, except to remember that if they're 18 today, that means in at least, typical if they're going to college or they're entering the workforce within 5 years, typically, right? And so as they enter the workforce, the ability and also the consumption side, as they enter the workforce, two things are happening. Both, of course, they are in the business and production side where they can make change, but they're also now the consumers. And I was just reading beforehand, I was thinking about telecommuting and how COVID may change, or at least slow down the buildup of transportation vehicle miles traveled as we recover. I think that telecommuting is going to slow that increase. But it's interesting, for a long time, the millennial generation in the US, there was lots of discussion about how they were not entering the housing market in the same way previous generations had done so. Much less home ownership from those born from, I think it's like 1980 through 2000. But there was just recently an article that as of this year, millennials were half of new home loans in the US. So, is there really a shift? Because there was this thinking that millennials were going to be renting, they wanted to be in the urban core and that sort of thing. Well, it seems to be changing. And so having the opportunity to have the next generation as they enter the workforce and enter the consumption stream to make changes in both what they do for a living and how that is done and how they consume is absolutely critical. It's taking it to the lifelong, making lifelong change. But how to engage them in today, I'll turn that over to Anna.
Yeah, thank you for that. And questions from the audience are coming in now in bigger numbers. So I would like to ask you in the few minutes that we have left, the time flies when you're having fun. Maybe first one to Mirjana again, one coming from Evan Brockman, who asks for the effects of education. Actually, he observes that not many people actually understand the effects of climate change on their health, and he blames that on education. Maybe you could respond to that, Mirjana.
Yes, I mean, education is definitely a driver for everything, and it starts with knowing about certain challenges that will help you transform, and you see that many of the issues disappear if people have a higher income and a better ability to get education, like obesity or other health issues that would affect the societies globally. But what we also see now in our research and comparing different experiences in different countries is that it would be too nearsighted to now say, oh, we just need to invest in education and things will get better. Because what we see, for instance, in Mexico is that in spite of enormous education investments over the last 10 years, at all, levels of education, starting with the primary level, have had no impact on economic growth whatsoever. Which brings us back to the national account and the fiscal reforms that are necessary, so that these people are actually incentivized to work in the right sectors, because it's actually generating the level of income that they need. You will also not see women in the labor market, even though they have the best education and pursue an inclusive growth track, if there's no social protection system in place that will allow them to take these jobs. You need women in STEM. science is extremely important given the technological change. So to me, it's increasingly evident that it's not only important to go to university, it's very important what you study, depending on what you do with your future. And women are still predominantly being pushed into areas like, being a teacher or doing care work, whilst their ability, given their school credits, would be in the higher tech sector. So this is also an economic loss if you don't capitalize on the human capital potential that you have in the country. So yes, education is important, but it's not the single and sole solution to the problem.
Yeah, thank you. And there are no easy answers to this. Otherwise, we would probably have implemented them already. So that you always get back to the complexity of the issue. But I'm glad also listening to you that education is key to it, what angle you choose to look at the issue. So thanks for that. And I think very appropriate in this specific event organized by an educational institution. So that is indeed good. I got a question from Purvi Iyer telling us that he or she is living in a tropical country where the effects of climate change are very visible, and asking for ways for them to actually contribute to solutions to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. In a way, this is a question also for more education, because an underlying thought of this is that the people there do not know enough about it, not about the severity of the issue and what you can do about it. So I think also looking at the time that we have, just a few minutes, I go to two other questions. The one is on the involvement of youth, of young people. How do you actually encourage them to be involved? And Tanya specifically asks how they can push and support industry to change. Let me answer that one myself, as I have been working with young people both in the Netherlands but also globally to encourage young people to unite and also learn how to do that. And there is an important step to make from being a protester and pushing from the outside to actually joining industries or governments, local or national, at the table. And that is, again, also going back to knowing what you talk about. That's not necessarily education in the traditional sense of the word, but also familiarize yourself with the issue and know what your own interest is and your own perspective, and how that actually adds to the discussion that there already is. And you will notice the moment you are knowledgeable about it and you do add value to the discussions, that you will be invited back. So that would be my tip to young people thinking about ways how to be involved. That is I think, key to it. Then a question to Laura coming from Lionel Gal, and that is a US question. That is why I pose it to you, Laura, is on can we make concrete progress in the US without a push from the federal government? A difficult one, I guess, in just a few months ahead of the elections.
There is. So can we make concrete progress? Yes. Will we make the progress that we need to make? As an economist, we would argue for federal policy. A patchwork of policies it's not going to be as efficient. It's not going to be as far as you need to be. So absolutely, we do need federal government. I will say that while it has been a tough 4 years for the environment in the U.S., it has not been. We will recover. Policies that were implemented that are making their way through the courts right now, that are being lifted or turned around, they are not gone. They are being litigated. And folks would argue that the science and the analysis that supports the original regulations out of the EPA will stand. They'll stand through the courts because they're based in science, and science will win the day. At least that's what we are hoping. And I believe that to be true. So yes, we absolutely do need federal government. We need that push. We need carbon taxes. We need to, it's the same story. We need to stop subsidizing fossil fuels and so forth, invest in R&D, build the better mousetrap. That is the way that, that harness that entrepreneurial spirit and thinking in the U.S. But we are making concrete progress. Looking to, states like California, even states like North Carolina, who tends to be a purple state, maybe more red these days, North Carolina is now the third largest, might have changed to fourth, but third or fourth in the top 5 in the U.S. in solar energy. And it is growing rapidly due to some policies at the local level. So things are absolutely moving forward.
Thank you. Well, thank you for this encouraging message. That's good to hear, also from a country outside of the US. So looking forward to more of that. Looking at the clock, I see that we are approaching the end of the time that we got at the beginning of this panel. Just one final question to the two of you, and that is, do you have any wise words, conclusions, tips to the audience, thinking of what we have just discussed, and also maybe reacting to some of the questions that ask for how they can be involved and engaged in the way forward? Mirjana, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Marcel. And I'm combining with the previous question about, multi-stakeholder approaches and bringing in news. We almost forgot about the SDGs in the COVID crisis, and we urgently have to bring them back. The paradigm shift that happened with the SDGs, in my view, is twofold. One, development cooperation is not about North and South anymore, or East and West. It's a national responsibility, it's a local responsibility, and it's a joint responsibility. So it's not about transfers, it's about ownership and building responsibilities and accountabilities in the country, first and foremost, because they are primarily responsible for their own inclusive development. The second paradigm shift is that it's not a framework for diplomats, and it's not a framework for governments alone. It's a framework for the people. It was developed with the people, and it's meant to be having an impact on everybody, especially the most vulnerable persons. So what it proves is, and it's a smart framework, I'm working with it, and I've learned to really realize that I have come to the realization that it can't be better. It's the result of a multi-stakeholder, long-term consultation process that involved everybody across the globe. And if you do the same at the national level, you have stronger policies. You have better policies. If you want to involve youth, they will be involved if you show them that what they contribute is actually taken into account, and that they are not just a backdrop for elderly politicians, but that they're actually being heard and they see their views reflected in the policies and regulatory frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you. Straight to you, Laura. Try to be brief.
I'll be brief. The path forward is one step at a time, and I guess my last message would be is to never give up, and just in the same way that while you can feel that no individual vote matters when you're voting, every vote absolutely matters critically, because it's the votes pulled together that make the change and that determine outcomes. And so each person playing their role, taking one step at a time, is what leads to the aggregate change, right? It is not, and don't be the tyranny of it must be big change for us to move forward. It's the little wins that matter, and they matter just as much. So keep at it, and I'm hopeful. I am not at all pessimistic. I am hopeful, and I think this is now a great time because there's so much opportunity ahead of us.
Thank you. These are very encouraging words. And in a way, they answered Laura Ayer's question, who asks that for young people coming out of college, many have a huge desire to pursue a career track to combat climate change. And she asks, how can we help them find this career track? You answer that in a way. Let me add to that a few more sentences. And that is that a career track to combat climate change is not limited to environmental or ecological studies or professions. This has to be done in any sector, in any profession. And what you have to develop is a lens, a way of looking at issues that take the long term into mind and into perspective, so you can actually work on solutions and your own contribution to a greener future. And I think that is what matters. And that means that whatever kind of background you have, you can make a contribution. That is a variation to what you just said, Laura. And I would really, with you and with the two of you together, encourage everybody who is listening to this panel to actually do that. And you don't have to have a green nameplate to actually be green in your actions. So that is what I hope people take away from this panel discussion. Not being discouraged from the complexity of the issue, but being encouraged of what specific place and role you have, that actually what you do matters. With that, I'll close the panel. I thank the two of you for joining me in this, and I wish many of you listening in and joining the rest of the day a very fruitful last day of this conference, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you all for that engaging and inspiring discussion. As we transition to a short coffee break, we can keep the conversation going in the event chat and in the Q&A. After the break, we'll be joined by Dr. Heike Fuller, who will welcome our keynote, Dr. Dagmar Koska, and moderator, Dr. Vicki Arroyo, at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're just joining us now, feel free to share what country or state you're connecting with us from in the chat. Additionally, please remember to put your questions in the Q&A. Please remember that recordings of today's events, along with recordings of the first and second day of the symposium, will be posted online and in your virtual event dashboard on Eventbrite, and also on the Global Change Program's YouTube channel. A link will be shared in the chat. If you haven't registered for the conference, please visit globalchange.godtech.edu/GCAS to find a digital agenda and registration link. Registration does provide you with follow-up information, including recordings of the previous day's events. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing everyone in just a few minutes for our keynote introduction at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Welcome back. It is my pleasure to share a few words from Dr. Heike Fuller, the German Consulate General in Atlanta.
Good morning to all of you. Welcome back to the third exciting day of the Global Climate Action Symposium. What a truly outstanding event. During the last 2 days, you already experienced that this event brings together excellent experts to showcase climate change solutions. In my current capacity as EU local chair in Atlanta, I'm very pleased that this symposium is also an outstanding example of Americans and Europeans being united for climate action. The first German, UK, French Climate Diplomacy Day was held on September 9, 2014. It highlighted the importance of our climate diplomacy partnership and emphasized the need for ongoing climate action. The Climate Diplomacy Day has been continued since then, and finally turned into European Climate Diplomacy Week. This symposium, jointly sponsored by Georgia Tech and 6 European consulates in Atlanta during European Climate Diplomacy Week, clearly demonstrates our joint efforts to tackle this challenging topic. On behalf of all European colleagues, I would like to thank Georgia Tech for its great partnership. It is very valuable to us. For the upcoming fireside chat, I now have the great pleasure introducing 2 outstanding women, both lawyers and both with impressive accomplishments prior to their current positions. Dr. Dagmara Koska is a German lawyer specializing in German and international competition and energy law and holds a doctorate in the European antitrust law from Rheinische Friedrich Wilhelms University in Bonn. She joined the European Commission in 2008 and is currently the Senior Diplomatic Counselor at the EU delegation to the United States in Washington. She oversees climate and energy policies for the EU delegation, and in that field she also manages the relations between the European Commission and the US administration, Congress, the US states, and municipalities. Vicki Arroyo is Executive Director of the Georgetown Climate Center, where she leads work on climate law and policy and supporting leading states and cities in their efforts to address and prepare for climate change. She also serves as professor from practice at Georgetown University Law Center, where she teaches experiential courses and as a special advisor to Georgetown's president, focusing on interdisciplinary cross-campus opportunities. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Emory University, a Master in Public Administration from Harvard's Kennedy School, and a Juris degree from Georgetown. Dagmara Koska, Vicki Arroyo, the digital floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Fuller. And I also want to thank Dr. Cobb and all the wonderful organizers of this event. It's my honor to be here. I'm Vicki Arroyo, as you heard, and I'm so honored to be with Dagmara Koska. We will do our best to simulate a fireside chat, whatever that looks like in this era of COVID. And I'll start off by providing a bit of background. As you heard from our backgrounds, my work is primarily domestic, and we do a lot of work at the subnational level with leading states and cities here in the US. And so I'm really looking forward to learning, as I did from the last panel, about what's happening in other parts of the world, specifically the EU, from our wonderful guest. And I want to start out by doing my best at trying to capture what I think is happening there at a very high level for our audience, trying to make it accessible for everyone, maybe who's not following all those developments on the other side of the Atlantic, and make sure that I'm correct, and then turn it over to Ms. Koska for more detail. So for those of you who have not really been following everything that's been happening on the other side of the Atlantic, in July 2020, EU leaders agreed on a 750 billion euro recovery effort to help the EU tackle the crisis caused by COVID. And the recovery plan is called Next Generation EU, and it was approved to run through 2024. They also agreed on approximately 1 trillion euros in the long-term EU budget through 2027. And this is the regular EU budget plan that covers a 7-year period, which is called the Multi-Annual Financial Framework, or MFF. Earlier in June, EU environment and climate ministers held a policy debate on the contribution of environmental and climate policies to the recovery from the COVID pandemic. They agreed that the European Green Deal, the EGD, launched by the EU Commission in December 2019, should guide the recovery towards green growth and a more resilient EU. 30% of the total expenditures from the MFF and the Next Generation EU will target climate-related projects. Expenses under the MFF and the Next Generation EU will comply with the EU's objective of climate neutrality by 2050, the EU's 2030 climate targets, and the Paris Agreement. So I want to start out by asking Dagmara, can you confirm that that is accurate? And can you share with us a little bit about what led to that and the why behind it?
Thank you so much, Vicki. And first of all, welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I would like to congratulate Georgia Tech and also Madam Consul General, Dr. Heike and the European Consulates General who have assembled today, have partnered today to stage this wonderful, wonderful symposium. And indeed, I'd like to also congratulate you students, our audience, for asking very pertinent questions and really for your engagement throughout those 3 days. It's the second time that I have this great honor of speaking with you today, and last year I was there in person. I could see a wonderful building. It was really truly inspiring for me to see a building that actually lives up to the ambition that actually we're talking today about. So I, in my current role, like to describe myself as a bridge builder, and I'm happy today to actually talk to you about, what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, and try to answer your questions about, what and why the EU is there where it is. So it's not a secret, and Vicki has already underlined it, that, at the European highest political level, we have agreed with unanimity that we want to recover from COVID-19 in a green, resilient, and digital manner. On top of that, the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, in her first State of the European Union address, which happened just this September, she made clear that we actually would like to also speed up our greenhouse gases reductions within this decade. So what does it mean? We actually want to speed up from at least 40% greenhouse gases target for 2030 up to 55%, at least 55%. And let me tell you, today, the European Parliament, which is a directly elected body from all European member states, has voted to go for 60%. That's quite incredible. And this will have cascading effects on all economic sectors, not only within the European Union, but we think that it will have, because of the globalization of global supply chains, it will have effects on other across the globe and on the way we make business, on the way we cooperate with our global partners and competitors. So I think, Vicki, I'd like to kind of, first of all, also speak a few words about the why, and I think I'd like to mention, I don't know if we could kind of maybe just lay out, I think, what is it that we are trying to achieve. And we think that there are a number of daunting facts that we are dealing with today. So while we're trying to tackle the immediate health and economic crisis that is unfolding, we also have another crisis unfolding in front of our eyes. We see biodiversity loss. In fact, that has led to this pandemic. We see land degradation. We see deforestation, deadly air. We see growing amounts of plastic waste on our beaches. We see, thanks to our scientific researchers, that a growing ozone hole is in fact over most of the Antarctica, melting glaciers and permafrost, unprecedented droughts and wildfires. So many of our fellow citizens are in fact not only in California experiencing climate change not as a distant threat. It is a shocking reality today. Just last week, for example, the US Commodity Futures Trading Commission issued a daunting report highlighting how extreme weather causes swings in agricultural commodity prices. It concluded that climate-spurred market volatility could affect financial markets. This could have dire consequences for global financial system. So this is, I think, number one. And I think number two is that the economic cost of inaction is much higher than targeted action today. Early action comes cheaper. The sooner we act, the sooner we will see the benefits. the damage to the world economy could be the staggering 600 trillion euros, which is more than $700 trillion. We are bound to spend a lot of money to invigorate our economies because of the pandemic, because of the health crisis and the economic crisis. We will be lending this money from future generations. We need to spend this money responsibly. We owe it to our children and grandchildren, who I don't have yet, but I hope to have one day. And let me say, 70% of global energy investments are driven directly and indirectly by governments. This is our responsibility to act. Public institutions and lawmakers have to channel the trillions of dollars and euros around the globe into the direction that will not supercharge the emissions, that it will curb them.
Thank you so much. That is a really compelling statement of why the EU has chosen to lead. We're so grateful in other parts of the world to see that kind of leadership, because we're all in the same boat when it comes to climate change and the impacts that you're describing. So true that we're already seeing this now. It's not in the distant future. I'm from Louisiana. Louisiana is actually facing a threat from the 6th hurricane this season. And of course, Laura was the strongest storm to hit in something like 150 years. And some of that same part of Southwest Louisiana is really under threat right now. So our hearts go out to them and so many people who are suffering the consequences now from the changes that we're seeing play out in our lifetimes. And the best time to act on climate change was probably, some decades ago, but this is the second best time to act, given that we're here and we're appreciative of the leadership that folks are showing, including what we're hearing described for us. And I would love it now, Dagmara, if you could talk a little bit more in detail. I mean, I gave like the very broad brush strokes, but if you could tell us a little bit more about what you all are doing collectively there.
Thank you, Vicki. So we are in the final stretches of agreeing our 7-year budget. This is our multi-annual financial perspectives. We have the great privilege of agreeing an envelope of spending, which is kind of a long-term outlook. 7 years is a long period of time. As you know, for example, in the US, budgets are passed every year, and every year there's a question, where to allocate money and so on and so forth. And very often it's a very difficult business that the lawmakers have to devote a lot of time and attention. We do it once every 7 years, which is, in our point of view, really quite effective, because it kind of helps us allocate this money according to the priorities that we think are in fact the most pressing ones. But at the same time, we, through the 7-year budget, we are able to have a longer view on our priorities. It's not only short-term money and short-term spending, but kind of a longer view. So we're talking about more than $2 trillion in the 7-year budget. So it's 1.8 trillion, over 1.8 trillion euro. And it contains the Next Generation EU. You mentioned it. It's a facility of around 750 billion euro, which are going to be dedicated entirely to fighting the pandemic and to the pandemic recovery. And this money, the 750 billion euros, are going to be spent over 3 years and through grants and loans to our EU member states. The money will be borrowed on the markets by the European Union as a whole, and that's quite unprecedented. In this extent, it never happened before. So there are a number of elements in this deal that has been struck by the EU heads of state and government in July that you mentioned that impact the way how we recover. And I mentioned it in response to your first question, that we want to recover in a green, resilient, and digital manner. So first of all, the EU heads of state and government agreed in July that all expenditure needs to be fully aligned with and consistent with the Paris Agreement. That's number one. Number two is that EU member states that will want to tap into the Next Generation EU, the 750 billion that I mentioned, they will need to accept the EU carbon neutrality objective by 2050. Not only accept it, but in fact start to implement it. Why? Because they will need to set out this reform agenda and investment agenda in their national recovery and resilience plans. These national recovery and resilience plans will serve as a basis for them to apply for those loans and grants that I mentioned. And number three, which is, I think, quite relevant and very important, is that 30% of the Next Generation EU, so that's around $270 billion, are going to be raised on the markets through issuance of green bonds. Through our credit rating, the European Union is actually bound to attract a lot of demand for those green bonds. And to give you a magnitude, this is going to be roughly equal the amount of green bonds globally that were issued last year. So that's a lot of green bonds, and we hope to be kind of spurring green bonds issuance as we recover. So I think these 3 points are quite relevant, and I wanted to place them up front for you, and happy to go into details.
Thank you so much. And just mindful of the fact that our audience might be interdisciplinary, can you say a little bit more about what green bonds mean? I know that's also a popular approach now that we're seeing some of the leading states here take as well, but if you could just define that, that would be great, please.
Exactly. So green bonds are in fact, investments that are dedicated fully to, to sustainability. In general sense. So sustainability means not only fighting greenhouse gases emissions, but also sustainability in environment, sustainability, environmental protection, sustainable agricultural practices, and so on and so forth. So in fact, it's quite important to understand what sustainability means, and through our work on sustainable finance, we are trying to define it. And the word that kind of, is being mentioned by many these days is the word taxonomy. Taxonomy is the way to define green investments. And this boils down to questions such as, are the investments in natural gas, for example, green investments? Are the investments in nuclear energy green investments? And I think one very important criteria for us is do no harm. So when we talk about the alignment with the Paris Agreement, we definitely are devoted to do no harm to this objective. We need to reach the below 2% degrees global warming by mid-century, and really this is where it gets very, very tricky if we allow our globe to warm more than actually 1.5. We are at 1 point right now, and we're seeing all those devastating effects. So it is really, really important that do no harm principle is applied across the board.
That's really helpful. Thanks so much. I'm hoping that you could talk a little bit about how you're bringing businesses along. One of the things that I've heard from work as an attorney in the private sector, as well as a government official at the state and federal level here, is that businesses just want to know the ground rules, that they want regulatory certainty, although at least here our political system sadly doesn't always deliver that. But how much, are you seeing that by having a 7-year plan, businesses are coming along because it gives them that kind of certainty? Are they cooperating in this endeavor?
Very much, Vicki, very much. And I can give you a few examples. These are quite recent examples. Right before the Commission President unveiled the new target for 2030 when it comes to greenhouse gases reductions, we received an open letter from businesses who 170 businesses. These were multinational companies, and in fact, some of them in the US. Many of them were business associations, so they were even, representing broader groups and investor groups in particular. So they have issued a letter, an open letter to the Commission President, saying that, in fact, climate smart investments is the new business model for them. This is already embraced by businesses across the globe. And in fact, what they need from policymakers is what you're saying. They need clear direction of travel. They need policy support. They need legal certainty. Only then will they be able to channel the money, for example, into research and innovation, in order to be able to deliver some of those technologies that are helpful or that will be needed to abate hard-to-abate sectors. So industry, for example, transport, heavy transport might be very, very difficult to abate. We do not have the technologies today to abate those sectors, and we need businesses. When it comes to the United States, this side of the Atlantic, we had a kind of a similar letter that was written 2 weeks ago by a business roundtable. This is an association of 200 members spanning every sector of the US economy. They released a statement advocating for a more comprehensive and coordinated approach to reducing emissions. They feel that there is right now a patchwork of federal state regulations, tax incentives, subsidies, and other policies, and this is inefficient for them to be planning long term. So indeed, Vicki, businesses are embracing us. I interact quite regularly with businesses, and businesses say, this is the way to go about it. If you act quickly, you're able to be competitive in a longer term.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. And I do want to encourage folks on the line to share questions, and I'll be pulling those in as we speak a little bit later, so you can formulate them now, and I'll get to them shortly. I wanted to shift gears and talk a little bit about resilience to the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing. It's something that I know you've worked on, Dagmara, including here in the US with the Climate Alliance. It's something that our center at Georgetown Climate Center, has been doing for some time. And I'm reminded of some of the conversation on the last panel, which was about, thinking and doing policy globally, but acting locally. And adaptation in particular is something that obviously, you can look at what the risks are to your community and your state or whatever the jurisdiction is, and start to work on what might be different in this era of climate change. And it's something that we've been doing for years. We have a comprehensive adaptation clearinghouse that I invite people to check out, and you can see what states are undergoing climate planning, adaptation planning. Many of them are coastal states for obvious reasons. I think that, with the combination of sea level rise and also the storms, like I just mentioned, that's a pretty compelling reason to do it. But we're also doing work on things like urban heat in Washington, D.C., which has especially been tricky this summer in an era of COVID, where some of the things that people do to avoid heat, like come together at cooling centers or go to a mall or see a movie, was not really available to them. Splash parks, pools were closed, things like that. So we've really been working with the city and also with residents, including residents who are experiencing homelessness and people who serve them, as well as people in public housing, et cetera, to find out, what some of the challenges are of keeping safe and keeping cool, especially in this COVID era. But we're going to obviously see more of these challenges because heat's the first and foremost, impact, obviously, of global warming directly, and actually takes the most lives of any of the climate-related impacts. So I'd love to hear more about your work, both in the EU on resilience and how the discussion earlier about funding actually is funding some of that work to try to make communities more resilient and safe. And also, how you're translating those lessons for the U.S. audiences.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Vicki. And indeed, resilience and adaptation has for a long time not been top of everybody's minds. I think when we look into the Paris Agreement, when we look into the work that even the European Union has been doing over the last years, we've been seeing much more efforts and much more focus on climate mitigation. So everything that can minimize the greenhouse gases emissions into the atmosphere. But the other side of the story is the adaptation and resilience. So actually how best to build in some of those disasters that are happening into the planning of, for example, long-term infrastructure build out, into how our housing stock evolves, and how our communities are able to protect themselves from those disastrous effects of climate change that we are already starting to experience today. So, in fact, what we do on the ground here in the United States, and that I'm very proud to speak about this, because this is really something that that is very hands-on and very tangible. Last November, we have established a cooperation with the U.S. Climate Alliance. As some of you have heard potentially about U.S. Climate Alliance, this is a organization that assembles 25 governors in the United States who are on a bipartisan basis still devoted to the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And we have started this cooperation with them on resilience adaptation because this subject doesn't seem to be, partisan. It is a bipartisan. There is no question about the need to build out resilience, right? So we started this cooperation, and so far we have had a number of workshops, in-person gatherings, and in recent days we actually gather in the virtual space. And my last webinar was just yesterday with the US Climate Alliance and with EU institutions and EU member states. What we discuss is, for example, subjects that you've just mentioned. How to make sure that water infrastructure, that investments that go into water infrastructure are resilient. How to make sure that, for example, we can create on the ground at local level and state level banks, private institutions that are geared towards investing into resilience. So our yesterday's discussion, for example, was about how to create more demand for these type of investments. What comes, I think, clear from this discussion is that you really, really need to be planning well ahead. You need to be thinking about what different projects would be helpful in order to strengthen this resilience, to strengthen the communities. I think, especially now in COVID times, where we see that COVID has strengthened and has really brought forward some disparities and some inequalities in our societies, that we really put the investments where the communities need them most. And so that our resilience work is really also about the just transition towards climate neutrality in 2050.
Yeah, that's a great segue. I actually wanted to talk to you about equity and just transition. I mean, that's obviously a really important topic here in the U.S., given what we're seeing are the racial disparities in the impacts of COVID-19. Communities of color, Black and brown people and Indigenous people are dying disproportionately from a number of factors, including air pollution that's been, identified as a precursor, if you will, to the illness that you get, the lung injury from COVID-19, but also, lack of access to healthcare, food deserts, redlining and systemic racism in our society and more that has really brought into focus, along with some of the police, brutality incidents this summer, this real stark inequity that, at least in this country, we are still reckoning with, and how to lean in when we're talking about green recovery to make sure that those benefits are shared by all, and especially shared by those that are on the front lines for COVID, but also so many other things, including pollution. And I know that you're also thinking about equity and also just transition, which is another important topic if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, a subject that came up a lot more than I would have anticipated in last night's vice presidential debate, for example. What does a just transition look like? Because obviously, those folks who have jobs in a certain sector, fossil fuel industry, will need to be trained. How are you all looking at that? And is that something that the resources that you discussed go to in Europe?
Vicki, that's a very, very pertinent question. In the European Union, we have a very large support across our society for climate action, for our ambition to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. In fact, over 90% of our citizens support these goals. Now, we need to be aware that this transition is not going to be very easy. Actually, it's going to be very hard. We need to move on very, very fast if we are, to meet that objective, right? So unless we make sure that this transition is just, there will be no transition, as clear as that. So for us, this is really the very, very important element of our work. And how important it is, it shows you also the priority in kind of, political calendar. When in December last year, we unveiled the EU Green Deal, already a month later, we unveiled the Just Transition Mechanism. And now let me speak about the Just Transition Mechanism that we have unveiled. We started already in 2016 with a pilot project on coal regions in transition. We have already started to build out a platform to discuss within the coal regions, within the localities, within the trade unions on the local stage about what needs to be done, how the regions need to diversify their economic activity. Now in January this year, we made clear that it is not only about coal regions. It is about, in the European Union, about all carbon-intensive regions. And it's not only about, talking to them, helping them through technical assistance to develop transition plans, but it's also about supporting them with fresh money. So we have, within the Just Transition Mechanism, a dedicated fund that is aimed to bring 100 billion investments in those carbon-intensive regions over the next 7 years. Again, that's the perspective we're talking about. So that's a lot of money in the regions that really have a dire need to get supported. And on top of that, we have launched a platform where those regions can talk to each other and express, whatever successes they have achieved, whatever challenges they have, and meet together and discuss, what are the replicable examples that can be brought towards other regions. I think this is really quite crucial, and how you should be, in fact, thinking about just transition and identify a social group that really needs your help, and then try to really provide tangible help to these social groups. And let me say, I think just transition is not only about carbon-intensive regions in the EU. It will need to be mainstreamed in all policy work that we do. I see already just transition elements coming up through our work on sustainable agriculture, for example, and transport. These are all relevant areas, and there will be even more conversation about just transition as we move forward.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that transport theme because it's something that our center works on quite a bit. We facilitate something called the Transportation and Climate Initiative in this region from the Mid-Atlantic up through New England. And it has worked on a variety of issues over the last 10 years, including electrification of vehicles and charging corridors, freight flows, and trying to look at the carbon footprint associated with that, work on sustainable communities like complete streets and things, closer to the kind of city level. Even beating back a patent troll that was making it difficult to share real-time information on buses and transit. But in recent years, the states have been working to develop a cap and invest system that would invest in these communities to support the transition. And, obviously the EU ETS makes funding available through their carbon pricing mechanism. I will say, in this country, there's a tension. I'm not sure if you're seeing it there, but there's often a tension about how do you pay for the kinds of green investments that you want to make. And cap and invest is something that, because of concerns with stationary sources and shifting of pollution, there's been concerns in the past about hotspots. And wondering how you think about that in terms of not just the money that's coming out, both from our own COVID bills here in the US for stimulus and for support of people in the COVID era, but also in the EU, those kinds of infusions of funds in this era of COVID versus the support from something that might be more enduring, like a cap and invest system that you have in the EU. Your clean transportation work there, is that the kind of thing that's funded both through your EU ETS, or is it really mostly some of the funds that you just talked about earlier?
Mm-hmm. So Vicki, transportation is an area that in the European Union actually is responsible for 25% of overall greenhouse gases in the European Union. Again, I think this proportion is even higher in the US context. When it comes to kind of, all sectors contributing to the greenhouse gases emissions. So 25% in the European Union is still really a lot. And and I mentioned before, we think that transportation is one of those sectors that are hard to abate, and we have an objective to reduce transport emissions by 90% by 2050. So when you look into the 90%, clearly, there's 10% that you will not be able to abate, and therefore carbon sinks are going to be important. But let me now speak about a little bit the funds that we've identified that would be helping clean transportation. Well, first of all, we have the so-called that facility, which is Connecting Europe facility. Connecting Europe facility actually devotes quite a big amounts of money to in developing kind of the network of road infrastructure and transport sector in general. Different projects from different within the transportation sector from different areas. So just recently we have awarded 2 billion euro in investments to 140 projects from this Connecting Europe facility. And it clearly is visible from this very recent award that we are trying to, in fact, develop more railways, cross-border links and connections to airports and ports, and boosting also waterway transportation and the maritime sector. So the priority is given also to, limiting emissions from maritime transport in ports. For example, projects that will help, provide electricity to ships docking in ports. I mean, this, gives you a flair of, how sometimes these projects, are small scale, but one step at a time. That was also the motto of the previous discussion today. One step at a time. Those little projects, those small projects, may seem not important in kind of large scale, but if you add one on top of the other, I think that is very, very relevant. And I'd like to give you one example. Even because it is always, the question of money, and I very often try to look for good examples, and I've just recently found a good example for that from a World Resource Institute, as you know, one of the biggest think tanks in the world, and they have brought in research that shows that around $260 billion per year for upgrading infrastructure in the US could create additional 4.6 million gross jobs every year for 10 years. So, if we talk about infrastructure that could be smart and green and digital, this is also a job creator. And I think this is important for us to, in fact, convince everybody that actually makes economic sense. And it's not only good for environment, but makes economic case.
Absolutely. And also that upfront investment in things like buying down the cost of, electric trucks, that do cost more on the front end right now, pays off in the life cycle of that truck. Plus, that doesn't even account for all the climate and air pollution and other benefits. So absolutely, that's a really excellent point to keep in mind. So I have so many more of my own questions for you, but I want to start going to our questions from our friends out in the audience. And there's a question about how you apply this do not harm principle. This is from earlier in the conversation, obviously, but with the trade-offs between impacts and different dimensions that result from each policy. So that is one question, and I'll go on and put out another question because I've been wondering about this. The EU, really obviously a leader on so many fronts. How are you promoting sustainable economy among other world superpowers given this leadership? How is that going with your conversations? And I assume that this is something that actively is happening right now with diplomats like yourself and delegations throughout the world, given that, the Paris ambition has to be ramped up in this time frame.
Mm-hmm. So Vicki, these are really excellent questions, and I'd like to start with the last. I mean, we need to think out of the box. I mean, I think we one part of our work is to revise and review the legislation that we have in place, on renewable energy, how to make sure that, for example, the market take-up of energy storage is facilitated, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, we also have to think globally. So one thing that we've recently announced as a kind of a new tool that we think will help us not only to ensure environmental integrity of our policies, but also will make sure that our businesses still remain competitive, is the so-called carbon border adjustment mechanism. It is not clear yet what exactly that will be. In fact, we are still evaluating responses to public consultation that is still ongoing until the end of October, or October 28th, in fact, to be precise. And the design definitely will be influenced by some important considerations, such as the WTO compatibility of any such matter. But, this kind of shows you that we're trying to make sure that not only have we a very competitive domestic industry, but that our industry has a level playing field globally. And I can tell you this is a very difficult measure. It will be very difficult to design it. A number of people have been thinking about it. A number of economists have been thinking about it in the past. It never has been considered urgent or necessary, absolutely necessary, in order to bring it from theory into practice. But now here we go. The EU again is going to be entering uncharted territory and is going to be making a proposal as early as probably in the first half of next year. And this is one that very much dominates my discussions here in the United States, but I hear from my colleagues in China, for example, and in Japan and in other places that this is very relevant for other governments as well, to understand early on what the EU is planning to do. The do no harm principle is one that you will be hearing more and more about. When I speak to my colleagues from the European Investment Bank, as you know, the largest multilateral lender and borrower in the world, they tell me that where they're trying to, for example, design right now a strategy for the bank to have this absolute Paris Agreement compatibility. If the biggest lender and a borrower in the world can move into the alignment with the Paris Agreement, with the no harm principle, this will also have spillover effects on other multilateral development banks. And I know that my colleagues are giving a lot of presentations and explaining to, for example, other world banks here in Washington, D.C. that have their main seats in Washington, D.C. So you see, I think this is, beginning of the very exciting journey. We don't know all the answers today, but we want to shape those answers going along with you and with a lot of input from various corners, and that's why those public consultations are really an important element of all the policy work that we conduct.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. Our next question talks about how we communicate the idea of not seeking instant gratification and short-term personal gain, saying that this is one big obstacle here in the States. And that reminds me of an observation years ago that a colleague of mine who I worked with at EPA decades ago said that after she spent some time in Europe in some kind of exchange role, and how she was really struck just by all the examples that she saw in her work, in the community, in her children's education, about how, the emphasis in Europe is often on the we, the community, and that kind of, sacrifice maybe of your own individual needs, sometimes for the greater good, which is often very different from the kind of rugged individualism that we have seen promoted here in the U.S. So I think that might be what the questioner is getting at. And would love your thoughts on how we can have those conversations. It also reminds me of some of the questions that I saw coming in on the earlier panel from some of the young people about, kind of the importance of individual action, and also how people can get involved in making a difference on this issue, because I think sometimes this is an issue that can feel very overwhelming and somewhat depressing to read about. And I think working on these issues with a sense of purpose can also help a great deal. So, any of your thoughts on either one of those fronts, Dagmar, would be appreciated.
Mm-hmm. I felt that an answer that has been provided by a preceding speaker was quite enlightening. When students and young people ask, what is it that you can do in your daily life, and what jobs could be helpful for fighting climate change, the answer is this is all across approach, right? So you can be a farmer, and you can apply, sustainable agriculture practices. You can limit the use of pesticides. You can grow more organic veggies and fruit, right? So I think you can do, in whatever calling you have, you can have just this awareness. Stop questioning science behind man-made climate change. Just go for it and accept it as a reality, and try to change it one step at a time. So that's really quite important, and that's why I'm so thrilled to, every month, really honestly, every month I have the opportunity to speak to students, and it is quite important for me to explain, that this is really everybody's responsibility. Of course, policymakers, lawmakers, again, they have a huge responsibility towards you, but you have also, a role to play in this. And when it comes to the instant gratification question, when we elaborate, and then I can speak about the policymaking in the European Union, of course, when we elaborate our legislation and our proposals, we always have very deep impact assessments. So we look into long-term effects of whatever we're trying to do. And let me tell you, there are a lot of colleagues involved in this. There's a lot of analytics and data crashing and so on and so forth involved. And let me give you one example why the European approach makes sense when it comes to specifically for energy, an area that I know. The European Union is a large importer of oil and natural gas and even coal, right? So if, for example, we go for the climate neutrality and for 55% of the greenhouse gases reduction by 2030, this, in fact, will amount to 25% less costs for importing those fossil fuels, right? 25%, that's a lot of money. That's around 100 billion euro saved over the next decade. And it is about 3 trillion euro, so more than $3 trillion by 2050. That's a lot. We right now spend 2% of our GDP on fossil fuels. If we are able to limit that, that will strengthen not only our kind of bottom line, but also will it help us be more resilient, right? In terms of kind of depending on imports. And many of those energy projects raise a lot of energy security concerns. And so for us, it is directly strengthening our negotiation towards our international partners when it comes to supply, for example, of energy.
That's great. Hopefully you hear me okay. I think turn off my sorry, Dagmar, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I sort of lost the connection for a minute. So were you done with that?
Absolutely, Vicki. I think I lost at least your audio for a few moments.
Yeah, I'm going to actually shut down my video for a minute just to see if that helps with the connectivity, because sometimes that bandwidth issue is the problem. I want to go back to the students who were asking earlier in the call, hoping that some of the folks from Georgia Tech and Georgetown and other universities might still be on the line. The question about how to get into this field and other work that's meaningful. And I definitely appreciate very much what the previous panelists said, but also what Jaguara Koska said about, really no matter what you choose to do in life, whether it's in the private sector or in the public sector or nonprofits, climate change touches so much that you will really be able to make a difference by asking the climate question, not just what the footprint is of your organization and how you could change that, but also, thinking proactively about resilience, which is something that can really, save both dollars and, lives in some instances, depending on what your work is, no matter what field you go in. And certainly that's true of a lot of the wonderful engineers that are going to be coming out of Georgia Tech, but also the lawyers that come out of my school, Georgetown Law. And, in terms of how to engage around this, in addition to, social media and voting and things like that, I would say in our experience at the Climate Center, there's many opportunities to engage through organizations like ours and others on the kind of policy development that's often happening close to home at the state and local level, and certainly at the federal level as well. I mean, the kind of, rollbacks that you've seen in recent years of some of the leading climate policies like the car standards or the Clean Power Plan, which is something that we worked on closely with EPA when Gina McCarthy was there. Our center works on facilitating comments to facilitate a public record that, is based on the science and the facts and the experience of states that have been leading on this issue for some time and have proven that there can be real win-wins from moving into a cleaner direction, like we're hearing from our friends in the EU. And so there are opportunities to engage, in public comments, even in this virtual time. Planning commissions are meeting, forestry commissions, urban forestry commissions, working on urban heat issues. I think really no matter where you are, you often can find ways to get engaged. And I know that, Kim Cobb in Atlanta has been very engaged, and my friends from Emory, just across Atlanta, Keenan Howitt, who leads the sustainability work for my alma mater, is very engaged in the community there in Atlanta. So I really, really encourage students to, reach out and find ways to get involved through volunteering, through being a research assistant for a professor who might do work in this area and need some support, through centers like ours at Georgetown and the colleagues at Georgia Tech who's putting on this event. Because often there are these kind of real world work experiences that you can have that really give you a sense of purpose and let you know that you're making a difference on what can sometimes feel like a really overwhelming challenge. But I'd love to hear, Dagmara, your own experience and what your career advice might be for some of those young students.
That's actually a very, very exciting topic to speak about, because I have a young son, and so it is, for me also at one moment in time to be able to discuss with my son what he might be, what his career opportunities could be if he were to be, choosing going into my footsteps and trying to work on clean energy, on climate action. But I think, before you kind of think about the career perspective, you can still kind of, change the habits that you put into place every day. For example, instead of going to Starbucks and buying your coffee every day and throwing away the cup, you could bring your own cup, right? For example, before taking another straw, you could kind of, maybe drink from the glass. Before, when shopping and buying products, why don't you bring your own shopping bag, right? Instead of using, plastic bags. We, for example, know that a staggering 75% of the plastic on the EU beaches are in fact from single-use plastic. So that's amazing. And I engage my sons every year in the beach cleanup, for example. We go, and really, if you only spend 1 hour somewhere, in the forest, trying to clean plastic from forests, from beaches, from streams, you make a very, very big difference. So I think that kind of starts, that education, so to say, starts quite early. And really, my young son is 4 years old, and he was cleaning the beach with me the first year we came to the US when he was only 2 years old, and we continue every year, right? But when it comes to those jobs that you could choose, I think I look a lot into how the data analytics will be able to help us move over to climate neutrality by 2050. I think there is a lot we can do with data, trying to understand air pollutions. For example, by looking into data collected, for example, by satellites, you can easily see how decisions by mayors on introducing, for example, congestion charges might impact directly the air you breathe, right? So engineering and data is really an exciting area for me. I think we need economists to be able to tell us that yes, this actually is good for the bottom line, like we have spoken earlier about. This is good for the businesses. We need lawyers to be able to translate this into legislation that will provide this legal certainty that we spoke about earlier. We need engineers to be able to plan, for example, that when constructing offshore wind turbines and using the steel in the ground offshore in the Atlantic, for example, or in the North Sea, that you plan into the construction that, for example, there will be potentially more stronger winds, right, because of the hurricanes that will come in, right? So engineering jobs are extremely relevant, so that we know, for example, that we lay out the electric charging stations all across our countries, and that those charging points will, for example, interact with your iPhone or with your smartphone and with your tablets, that you will be able to understand how much what you're doing quickly. I think business models, as well as business practices, as well as technologies, will need to innovate. And we need those bright minds, those young minds that actually question whatever we do and come up with even better solutions to be able to drive this transition.
Well, that's wonderful. And I think that is a great and high note to end on. Thank you so much, Dagmara, for what's been, for me, a fun and really inspiring conversation. Thank you so much for your leadership in the EU and for sharing those best practices with our US audience and others from around the world who are dialing in and zooming in with us today. And I will turn it back over to the organizers and just thank you all for your time and your excellent questions. And thank you especially to Dagmara. I know we're all virtual, but maybe we can give a round of applause anyway. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you all for wonderful questions. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Vicki and Dagmara, and our audience for that invigorating, inspiring discussion. Please remember to keep using the chat and Q&A features on the virtual platform to keep that dialogue going. Now we'll continue this topic of student involvement by briefly showcasing 4 student voices from the field of COVID-19 and green recovery. Our first lightning talk will be given by Anna Marie Eustace. Anna Marie is an undergraduate at Georgia Tech studying environmental engineering. Today, she'll be giving an overview of her summer carbon reduction challenge work, proposing virtual conferences as a low carbon alternative.
Hello, my name is Anna Marie Eustace, and I am a third-year undergraduate in environmental engineering at Georgia Tech. This summer, I participated in the Global Change program's Carbon Reduction Challenge. through which I created a proposal and calculations based on the carbon emissions reductions within academia that can be carried out virtually. I propose that a case study future conference provide virtual access for 50% of registered attendees to participate remotely, primarily avoiding the carbon production from modes of transportation, while also allowing for some in-person networking and setting an example for the rest of academia. This was inspired because researchers are among some of the top creators of flight emissions. Meanwhile, studies have shown no relationship between air travel emissions and academic productivity, and even revealed that a larger carbon footprint can negatively impact a climate researcher's credibility. To incentivize and enhance the virtual conference experience, I proposed an online conference platform such as the Georgia Tech Startup Gatherly that functions as a virtual meeting hall with presentations, classes, posters and video presentations, speed networking and breakout video sessions, and the option to virtually walk up to individuals and begin text or video conversations privately. This plan has a carbon reduction potential done with a bracket calculation between 27.3 and 1,500 metric tons of CO2 per conference, and cost savings per conference of $170,000 for the society I looked at, and $7,000 for an individual research group such as the Georgia Tech Water Collab, who I work for. Virtual conferences offer inclusive collaboration to the members of society who are typically excluded from traveling to research conferences, such as those with disabilities, childcare responsibilities, insufficient funding, or inflexible work schedules. With minimal monetary investment and upfront planning, virtual conferences have the potential to reduce global carbon emissions, costs for the hosting society, and the economic burden on attendees, while growing the reputation of the hosting society and participants as leaders of positive global change and inclusivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Marie. Next, we will hear from Gordon Stead, a master's student at the University of Georgia studying environmental engineering. Gordon will be discussing the potential for community-scale solar-powered housing for improving residential energy consumption.
Good morning. My name is Gordon Stead, and at the Material and Energy Systems Lab at UGA's College of Engineering, we are considering ways in which we can improve the uptake of renewable energy, reduce emissions, and promote solutions that may apply to the developing world context as well as our own. We therefore suggest an approach termed community-scale generation that aims to meet all of these objectives. In the late 19th century, Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse fought for control of America's electrical market through their rival technologies. Ultimately, alternating current, or AC, developed by Nikola Tesla, prevailed over Edison's direct current, or DC, as it allowed electricity to be transmitted efficiently over long distances. But today, as we seek sustainable solutions to our impending energy crisis, perhaps a return to DC electricity is worth considering, given its synergy with solar energy, distributed generation, and its high efficiency. In the community-scale generation, or CSG concept, solar photovoltaic arrays are ground-based and supply a nearby community of, say, 50 to 100 houses. Being so close to the consumers, the whole system, including short-distance transmission, can run entirely on DC electricity. As well as avoiding most of the 5% average energy loss in US utility electrical transmission, energy demand can be reduced by up to 35% through a combination of ultra-efficient DC household appliances and eliminating losses through AC-DC conversion. Unlike rooftop systems, ground-based arrays can be mounted on solar trackers, which allow the PV cells to generate substantially more power as they face the sun directly during the daylight hours. Here in Georgia, dual-axis trackers could provide a boost of up to 30% energy over the year compared to standard flat arrays. These combined energy sources, along with suitable battery systems, could conceivably allow communities to supply all of their own energy sustainably and at quantities sufficient for a high level of comfort and connectivity. By analogy, many communities in the world supply their water on a similar community scale, drilling down to pump water from a well, distributing it to individual houses, and storing it for later use. The community scale generation concept is, in effect, another vertical well, but facing upwards, catching the natural supply of energy from the sun and using batteries for storage. If our consumption in parts of the highly developed world is met just by our local supply, we can seriously limit our impact on downstream and upstream on the rest of the world. And if the developing world can leapfrog past utility scale technology directly to a community scale concept, we may yet achieve our goals of both sustainability and development. Thanks so much for watching this presentation, and please let me know by email at gordon.stead@uga.edu of any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordon. Georgia Tech undergraduate Kun Raju presents the next talk. Kun is studying chemical and biomolecular engineering and will be discussing the role natural gas plays in meeting global energy needs.
Air pollution and climate change are the main concerns of the present world. Millions of deaths and public health hazards are attributed to poor air quality. Global temperature increase causes more frequent natural disasters such as drought, wildfires, and hurricanes. The energy sector is considered as the main cause of the problems, with emissions from fossil fuel combustion such as carbon dioxide, sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter. As energy sectors around the globe suffer a beating caused by COVID-19, developing the use of LNG can aid our progress towards green recovery. The two main issues are the management of boil-off gas, or BOG, in the LNG fuel tank, which is mainly due to the heat ingress from the environment, and safety. There is thus the need to limit the pressure increase inside the LNG fuel tank without releasing the BOG into the atmosphere. Pressurized tanks are often preferred owing to the ability to withstand high pressure, affordance of easy BOG management, and need for minimal maintenance. The two BOG management options are as follows. 1. Extraction of BOG using a compressor from a low-pressure LNG fuel tank. 2. Self-containment of the BOG at the expense of pressure increase with a high-pressure LNG fuel tank. The cost of the compression package is the main cost implication of the first option, while the high-pressure LNG fuel tank is a major cost component of the second option. The second option is economically attractive for tanks with capacities greater than 1,000 cubic meters, owing to the high cost of the required high-performance installation such as vacuum installation. The use of compressor is thus preferred for BOG management in large LNG fuel tanks. Safety is also an important technical challenge. Loading the fuel tank with LNG is completely different from the HFO loading due to the fuel characteristics. One difference is that LNG is stored as boiling liquid, which means that an accurate analysis of thermodynamic state of LNG is required to prevent the overpressure of the fuel tank. A second difference is that LNG is a cryogenic liquid at temperatures of about -162 degrees Celsius. It is hazardous when it comes into contact with conventional steel structures or piping and personnel. It is important to note that LNG is a promising alternative fuel to meet the rising energy demands. It can reduce CO2 emissions by about 20% as well as other greenhouse gases. However, LNG is harder to treat than conventional fuel due to its low flash point. Therefore, we should improve the technologies and regulations to utilize LNG as safer, sustainable, and economical fuel as we continue to promote the green recovery.
Tiago Eslinger concludes today's lightning talks. Tiago is a Georgia Tech undergraduate studying biochemistry and earth and atmospheric sciences. Tiago will discuss the importance of digital platforms for climate action and how he implemented these in his role as co-founder and co-chair of Fridays for Future Georgia Tech and president of Students Organizing for Sustainability.
The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the main mediums we use to act on climate. As co-founder of Fridays for Future Georgia Tech, co-founder of the Georgia Tech Divestment from Fossil Fuels organization, and current president of Students Organizing for Sustainability at Georgia Tech, I've learned firsthand how our student organizations have had to adapt to the virtual world. Last academic year, we used to strike weekly on Fridays and decided to continue that momentum into the summer with weekly digital posts. But this wasn't enough. With more people looking towards online as an everyday channel of communication, the internet is one of the most effective tools we have for climate action. Social media, email, outreach, and even online meetings have become modes of continuing our momentum while adjusting what didn't work before. If we are to have a green recovery from this pandemic, we need to continue finding new ways to perform outreach, provide distinctive ways for people to get involved, and listen to all voices of a community, not just a select few. Traditionally, as student organizations, we would create flyers to post around campus, talks to have in various classrooms, and even stand on Tech Walkway and let people know why and how they can act on climate change. Of course, none of that is as effective, or in some circumstances even possible, as it was before. But we can now attend meetings and events that maybe we could not have attended before. An online presence and social interactions have greatly increased in significance. With students organizing for sustainability, we recently altered our organizational structure to allow for more member involvement in future semesters, which could continue looking like this fall for a while. When you stay in the same room for hours upon hours, days upon days, I found that this sort of structure helps. That this is something that we are constantly learning to improve upon and always should be. So if there's just two things I want you to take away from this talk, it's that we must continue fighting this fight and never stop learning about how we can better serve within our communities. When 2020, the year filled with numerous affairs, to say the least, comes to an end, we need to remember that the global concerns that have defined this year will not end with it. And if we want to create a just and climate-neutral future, we need to work at that today, together, and by listening to each other. Climate change and implementing the UN SDGs will not be solved by one person, nor just one solution, but a diversity of ideas and successful communication will surely help us get there. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our students and for that call to action. I'd like to transition us now to present the finalists and winners of our first ever virtual student art and photography contest.
Okay, hello everyone. I hope everybody can hear me. Welcome to the Student Photography and Arts Awards ceremony. I would say this is the highly anticipated section of the symposium, so welcome. My name is Şebnem Özkan, and I'm the Associate Director of the Atlanta Global Studies Center. And for this photography and art contest, our center worked with Georgia Tech faculty, Georgia Department of Education, the Consulate General of Germany, as well as Barbara Dombrowski, the renowned German photography artist, who brought us the virtual exhibit, Art and Climate Justice, yesterday. So I would like to thank all our partners in this event. And I would also like to recognize our wonderful graduate assistant, Michael Jansby, who really helped us pull the event together. Before we go into the announcement and the awards, I would like to take a minute to also share a youth climate action survey that we conducted and just highlight a couple of things. We will be posting the survey to the symposium website. So hopefully, you will be able to see more details about the survey results. But I just want to mention briefly that 120 students participated in the survey, and this was for K through 18. So we would like to thank all the students who participated. And we are delighted that they showed significant knowledge of many effects of climate change. So we are very happy to see that. But they also indicated a bit of a lack of confidence in their knowledge of climate change and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which tells us that there's a lot we can do in that space as educators. But I would also tend to think that maybe our students are being a bit modest in their assessment of how knowledgeable they already are, because the photography and the art work that they submitted tells quite a different story. I think they are very well aware of the challenges of climate crisis and also ready to offer solutions and take action. So let me stop here. Let me congratulate all the students who participated in the survey and the art and photography contest. And let me congratulate the winners, obviously. And let me turn it to our wonderful partner at the Consulate of Germany, Heike, to share some further details about the contest and also introduce Barbara. Thank you, Heike. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Well, thank you, Şebnem. It's been a pleasure working with you as well. And I think to not steal too much of everybody's time today, I would now first hand over to Barbara Dombrowski, our final evaluator of the contest, so she can announce the winners, because that's what you're all eager to hear about, right? So Barbara, would you please take over?
Yes, I try. Hello, everybody. I just would like to share. That's the first problem. How can I share my monitor?
Barbara, I can share the slides if you would prefer.
Oh yes, please. Then would you please share it? I just give you a signal to go on when I want to have the next slide. Okay. So then, please, would you share? No, you have to go to the other side of the. This is the unfortunately, this is the last picture. You have to start on the other end of the presentation. Okay, here we go. And can you make it full screen? Yes. Okay, perfect. Okay, then I just have to read it because there is a lot to say. So, dear participations of the art competition, I would like to congratulate you all on your interesting and successful work. It was not always easy for me and the jury to choose among the many inspiring entries. Thank you very much for your wonderful works. And what I can say is go ahead and look at your environment with a sharpened eye. I would like to briefly mention 2 doubly awarded placements. In an open art competition, photography often has a harder time because at first it only displays things and the first glance does not directly interpret them. For reasons of content, I have therefore given the photographs a very, very small bonus in order to create a balance between the submissions. Furthermore, there is a double placement in the collages. Although they are slightly different in content, the underlying idea is similar, which is why I decided to award the prize to both of them. So I would now like to announce the winners of the categories K5. Would you please go to the K5? Selina? Yes. And the next one, so the third prize goes to Srika Patnaik. Congratulations. The photography picked up a crucial theme, nature and trees, and shows us that we cannot exist without them. The second prize goes to, you switch, please. The second prize goes to Taylor Smitherman. With a comparison in her drawing, she presented the subject very strikingly and yes, positively, that we cannot help but preserve the rainbow. Congratulations, Taylor. The first prize goes to Tanya Penny. She also takes up a confrontation and in a charming way draws our attention to the fact that we have to stop pollution on Earth. Congratulations. Then we can go over to the 6th to 9th degree. The third prize goes to Alexander Hockben. Alexander takes up the important topic of plastic waste in a striking and haunting photograph. Congratulations, Alexander. The second prize goes to Annie Biswas and Jayashree Patnak. The prize is shared by the two for reasons I described in the beginning. So congratulations to both of you. The first prize in this category goes to Elizabeth Robinson. Elizabeth's description of the eye is both a very creative realization of the theme and a touching approach to it, which is also stylistically very convincing. Congratulations to you, Elizabeth. Then we can go over to the next category, the 10 to 12. The third prize in this category goes to Brian Quingley and Neha Elor. Formally, the two works are very different, but both are convincing in terms of content. In his photography, Brian takes up the theme of the ever diminishing untouched nature for wild animals, which should makes us think, especially in the COVID-19 time. In her drawing, Neha takes up the theme of destruction in a haunting way. In the end, a lonely man remains on the horizon in a black hole in which all life has disappeared. Congratulations to both of you. The second prize in this category goes to Larissa Briscon. Here, too, an important topic, the destruction caused by climate extreme, is taken up and implemented. Larissa uses the means of documentary photography and enlightens in an inconspicuous, haunting, and formally strongly implemented way. Congratulations to you, Larissa. The first prize goes to Whitney Pruitt. With her drawing of a future Atlanta, Whitney creates a gloomy scenario beautifully executed in style. She creates a multi-layered memorial and incorporates one of the symbolics of climate change visualization, the polar bear, which is already extinct in her painting. Then we come to the last level, which is the college level. And in this category, the third prize goes to Lydia Fletcher. In her photography, Lydia takes up the important theme of consideration and hope. In the past, we could exist together with Mother Earth and all creatures without destroying. The picture captivates by sharp demarcation of light and shadow, with embodied in a symbolic way the crossroads we are at. The photography encourages us to think about where we are and how we can succeed in a future in harmony with the environment. Congratulations to you. The second prize goes to Christina Hilko. Our time and the time of a healthy earth is running out. This is the theme of Christina Hilk's work. She shows her idea in a creative realization as embroidery on a frame. One can understand the closed frame as the creation Mother Earth in perfection, in which symbolically, stitch by stitch, the destruction takes its course. The more stitches are placed, the further the destruction has progressed, until the sand in the clock has run out, all life has been extinguished. Congratulations. Yeah. And the last and first prize of this category goes to Patricia Grafunder. In her wonderful presentation, Patricia considers the economic political dimension of the climate crisis. She draws a dark puppeteer who, in an apocalyptic scenario in grey, made of dead fish, garbage, industrial chimneys and destruction, plays his diabolic game with obvious joy, and who pulls the strings in the background. In her drawing, we are all the puppets, externally controlled, blurring into grey, men in the background. The marionettes are holding hands, and only the three young people in the center still have color, still see clearly. They are the ones who can break the chains, can strip the threads, and cause the system to sway. Congratulations to all of you. I was very lucky to be in the jury and to have to see what a huge creativity is there in Atlanta and in the youth. I'm very glad about that. So now I can hand over to Mike again.
Well, thank you, Barbara. And of course, a very big thank you to everyone who submitted a photo. And of course, congratulations to all winners. The photos and drawings, they were really impressive. My name is Heike. I am an advisor for public affairs with the German Consulate General in Atlanta and responsible for all of our climate and energy related events. So that's why I'm here today. And I am very happy that I did not have to select the winners because actually I loved all photos that were submitted. So thank you to our jury for the pre-selection of the photos. And of course, thank you, Barbara Dombrowski, for being the final evaluator. To our winners, most interesting part now, we do have your email addresses on file. I will send out an email to all winners in the coming days, so please be on the lookout for that. If any one of you has not received an email from me by next week for whatever reason, please contact the consulate. I will put my email address in the chat in just a moment. You can also find and contact us on our social media channels. Just look for Germany Atlanta on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We are posting all of our events, contests, and raffles on our channels. And I hope you all have the chance to have a look at the amazing K-18 workshop videos that Barbara prepared and that were uploaded to the event website today. It's definitely worth it. But now I don't want to take much more of your time. So thank you again for all participants for submitting your photos. Special thank you again for Barbara Dombrowski for serving as final evaluator in this contest. Thank you to the Georgia Department of Education and the Georgia Tech Global Studies Center for this great collaboration. And thank you to the Global Change Program team as well for featuring the contest and the workshop as part of the Global Climate Action Symposium. So, and now I guess it's time to hand over to Dr. Kim Cobb for some concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Micah. It is absolutely amazing to see the results of the student art and photography contest that we just saw. And I will be keeping those powerful images with me for years to come. I'm sure many of us will. And I find them just such a beautiful reminder of how much we are all so deeply touched by the climate crisis. But how much capacity we have for action and a sense of purpose and shared goals for what we would want to have in our future, not just for our children and grandchildren, but for ourselves as well, of course, as the climate crisis continues to threaten communities on the coast today with Hurricane Delta bearing down. So as much gloom as we can muster, and there's plenty to go around, the words today, both from the amazing experts that we heard, Vicki, Arroyo, Dagmara Koska, and our esteemed panelists, really help us understand just how much is going on right now across all corners of the world to rise to meet this challenge of our time, and how the solution set is one that will bring us towards the kinds of images that we saw embodied in the student art and photography contest today. So this is really a celebration for the Global Change Program, a chance for us to showcase the breadth and depth of partnerships that are coming together across Georgia Tech, across Atlanta, across the state of Georgia, and of course across the oceans of the world together in hard work and solidarity. And again, that sense of purpose and beauty that we have in coming together. So I'm ever grateful for our partners on campus and beyond, especially the partnering Atlanta-based consulates. And of course, I need to shout out a huge thanks of gratitude for the Global Change Program staff, especially Selena Perrin, who you saw throughout this event, and Daniela Estrada, who you may not have seen, but who is behind the scenes working very hard to ensure that things go as smoothly as they went. I'm going to just give them a big round of applause, even though that has very little meaning. One of our cultural traditions that doesn't necessarily resonate, but it really is true. I hope you all are clapping where you are because they really deserve it. And not only that, but of course, Micah, Kelsey, and Sangwoo really helping to understand the importance of keeping track of the chats and the Q&As and the websites in support of the event today. I don't think it could have gone any better, and I'm very proud and grateful for the Global Change staff. I think one thing to remember as we part ways today is that we all have many opportunities that have been highlighted today to get involved. And I think that is just an important reminder. Resources in the chat that we will be compiling for you. Of course, we will have access to the full recordings of this event going forward, and make sure that you are registered to get that information. And visit the Global Change Program. I would be remiss if I didn't give a plug, I think, to the many students who are attending today about the Global Change Program, which is a really cross-campus program focused on education and research, events like this, and forming partnerships and bringing community together on and off campus. So if you want to get involved, please visit our website, get in touch, and we will help you join us to be part of the climate solution. So with that, I think I will wrap it up and wish you all a wonderful day. And again, in gratitude for your attendance across this incredible event. And I know that we will have many such opportunities to come together in the future and enjoy our shared sense of purpose and celebrate the many ways in which this incredible community is acting on climate. Thank you so much. And again, enjoy the rest of your week.